There are times in life when everything feels unclear, when the future seems like a path covered in thick fog, and fear takes hold of your heart, squeezing it tightly. You pray, but nothing changes. You fight, but the battle only grows more difficult. You knock on doors, but every one of them remains closed. In those moments, the enemy whispers in your ear, telling you that you are alone, that there is no way out. But what if I told you that everything you are afraid of, every challenge, every storm, every impossible situation has already been resolved? What if the solution has already been written in heaven before you even knew the problem existed? You are standing in the middle of a divine plan, and God has already been working behind the scenes. Stay with me, because by the end of this message, your eyes will be open to something powerful. You see, faith is not just about believing that God will do something. Faith is knowing that He already has. The Bible tells us that before the world was created, God had a plan. He is not reacting to your situation. He is not figuring things out as they unfold. God is not confined by time, and He is not surprised by the challenges you face. He declares the end from the beginning. What seems like a disaster to you is already a testimony in His hands. This is why Scripture says, "Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear." Isaiah 65:24. God already knows what you need before you ask. He has already provided the breakthrough before you even knew you needed one. You might be praying for deliverance, but God already sent the deliverance before you even realized there was a trap. You might be crying for provision, but God already placed the provision in your path before you even felt the need. He is the God who moves before you move, speaks before you speak, and acts before you even realize there's a need for action. The enemy wants to convince you that you are stuck, that there is no way out, that you have been abandoned. But listen carefully. God is never late. His timing is always perfect, even when you cannot see it, even when you do not feel it. He is already working. The delay you are experiencing is not a denial, it is preparation. The waiting season is not wasted, it is a divine setup. Think about Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, dreams of ruling, dreams of purpose. But then everything in his life seemed to go in the opposite direction. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. His reality seemed nothing like the promise. But here's the secret. God wasn't trying to figure out how to rescue Joseph. The rescue was already planned before the trouble began. The prison wasn't his destiny, it was a path to his destiny. The pit wasn't a mistake, it was a transportation system. God had already worked it out. Your situation may look like it's falling apart, but what if it's actually falling into place? What if the storm you are facing right now is positioning you for something greater? What if the pain you are feeling is the birthplace of your purpose? Think about the Israelites. They were standing before the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army closing in from behind. The sea seemed to block their escape, and fear gripped them. They cried out to Moses, saying, "Why did you bring us here to die?" But what they didn't know was that God had already worked it out. The sea was not an obstacle, it was a doorway. The enemy was not a threat, he was about to be destroyed. What they saw as an impossible situation, God saw as an opportunity to reveal His glory. When Moses stretched out his staff, the waters parted, not because God was figuring things out in that moment, but because the solution had already been prepared before the problem arose. That's how God works. What seems like a wall is actually a door. What seems like a delay is actually protection. What seems like rejection. But the problem is we want to see the whole picture before we trust God. We want to understand every step before we take the first one. But faith is about walking when you don't see the road, trusting when you don't see the answer, believing when everything around you says it's impossible. Think about Abraham. God told him to go to a land he would show him. No map, no GPS, no details. Just a command to move. And as Abraham moved, God revealed the next step. Some of you are waiting for God to show you the whole plan before you trust Him. But God is saying, just move, just trust, just believe. The provision is already there. The door is already open. The breakthrough is already assigned to you. But you have to take that first step in faith. Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Matthew 6:34. Worry is the enemy of faith. When you worry, you are doubting what God has already prepared for you. Worrying is acting as if God is still trying to figure things out, but listen, He already has. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. The problem you are facing today was already resolved in eternity. Some of you are carrying burdens you were never meant to carry. You are losing sleep over things that God has already taken care of. You are crying over battles that have already been won. If you only knew what was waiting on the other side of your obedience, you wouldn't be afraid. If you only knew how close you were to your breakthrough, you wouldn't quit now. If you only knew how God has orchestrated every detail of your life, you wouldn't stress over what's happening right now. Remember when Jesus was asleep in the boat during the storm? The disciples were panicking, thinking they were about to die, but Jesus slept. Why? Because He knew something they didn't. He knew the storm was not the end of their story. He knew the waves couldn't sink them. He knew that the other side was already written into the plan. The storm you are in is not the end of your story. The setback you are facing is not the final chapter. The pain you are feeling is not permanent. You may not see the way out, but that doesn't mean there is no way out. You may not understand what God is doing, but that doesn't mean He is not doing something. If you could see what God sees, you wouldn't be afraid. If you could hear what He has already spoken over you, you wouldn't doubt. If you could glimpse the victory He has already secured for you, you wouldn't hesitate to trust Him. So let me ask you, what if the very thing you are stressing over right now has already been taken care of? What if your miracle is already in motion? Stay with me, because there is more I need to share with you. The greatest challenge to faith is not the presence of the storm, but the inability to see beyond it. The enemy wants you to be so consumed by what is in front of you that you forget who is behind you. He wants you to measure your future by your present struggles. But let me remind you of something powerful. God has never been limited by what you see. He is not restricted by what you understand. His ways are higher than your ways, and His thoughts are far beyond what your mind can comprehend. That means, while you are looking at the problem, He has already prepared the solution. While you are waiting for an answer, He has already spoken it into existence. The delay you perceive is not a delay at all. It is a divine process in motion. Look at Daniel. When he prayed and fasted for 21 days, seeking an answer from God. From the first moment he prayed, heaven heard him. The angel later told him, "From the first day you set your heart to understand, your words were heard." But the manifestation of the answer was delayed due to a battle in the heavenly realm. That means some of you are waiting for something that has already been dispatched. The breakthrough has already been ordered. The deliverance has already been assigned. The provision has already been released. What you need is not to panic, but to stand firm in faith, knowing that what God has spoken cannot be reversed. When God sent manna from heaven to the Israelites, He didn't send it ahead of time. He didn't store it up in barns for them. Instead, He sent it daily. Why? Because He was teaching them to rely on Him each day. He was showing them that provision is not something you chase after, but something that follows when you walk in obedience. Some of you are stressing over the future, but God is telling you that He will provide for you day by day. You are worried about tomorrow, but tomorrow is already in God's hands. If He could feed Elijah by commanding ravens, if He could sustain a widow during a famine with just a handful of flour, if He could multiply loaves of bread and fish to feed thousands, do you think He will fail you? The enemy wants to exaggerate your problems so much that you forget the promise. He wants you to believe that what you are going through is bigger than what God has already spoken. But let me remind you of something. God's word is greater than your situation. His promise is stronger than your struggle. His plan is more powerful than your opposition. If He said it, it must come to pass. Look at the life of Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, his children. Everything seemed to fall apart all at once. His friends doubted him, and his wife even told him to curse God and die. But what they didn't realize was that Job's suffering was not the end, but only part of a process. What Job couldn't see was that even in his lowest point, God had already secured his restoration. In the midst of his pain, Job didn't know that God had already decided to give him double of everything he had lost. What if I told you that what you lost is nothing compared to what God has already set aside for you? What if the suffering you're going through is simply a setup for a greater testimony? Faith is not about seeing, it's about believing. It's about walking forward even when the road ahead is invisible. It's about trusting that God has already laid the foundation, even when you can't see the structure. That's why Paul said, "We walk by faith, not by sight." If you live by what you see, you will always be shaken. But if you live by faith, you will be unshakable, because you will know that no matter what's happening, God is in control. There was a time when Jesus stood before grieving Mary and Martha. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. The tomb was sealed, and the people had already accepted that it was over. But Jesus spoke words that shattered their human understanding. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" What they thought was too late was actually right on time. What they thought was the end was just the beginning. What they thought was a permanent loss was about to turn into an unforgettable miracle. Some of you have already given up on certain prayers. You think it's too late, the door is closed, and the opportunity is gone. But listen to this. God doesn't operate on human timelines. He doesn't follow earthly limitations. What seems dead to you is still alive in His hands. The tomb may be closed, but He holds the keys to resurrection. Some of you are worried about how things will work out. You are trying to figure out how God will make a way, but let me remind you, He doesn't need your blueprint. He doesn't require your permission. He doesn't ask for your approval before He moves. He is sovereign, all-powerful, and beyond comprehension. If He could part the Red Sea with just a breath, if He could bring down the walls of Jericho with a shout, if He could raise Jesus from the grave, do you really think your situation is beyond His reach? Too often we limit God by our human understanding. We try to fit Him into our expectations, but God doesn't move based on human logic. He moves according to His divine purpose. That's why He can make rivers in the desert, create paths in the wilderness, and turn what was meant for evil into something good. That's why He can use a shepherd boy to defeat a giant, a prisoner to rule a kingdom, and a barren woman to give birth to a prophet. His methods are unpredictable, but His faithfulness is undeniable. When the disciples were caught in a storm, they panicked, thinking they were going to die. But in the middle of the chaos, Jesus came walking on the very thing they feared, the waves. What does that tell you? It tells you that what looks like it will destroy you is actually under His feet. What seems like it will take you down is already beneath His authority. The storm is not in control, He is. The winds are not in charge, He is. The enemy is not winning, God is. That's why even when you don't understand what's happening, you must stand firm. Even when it feels like everything is against you, you must trust. Even when you feel like giving up, you must hold on, because what you don't see is greater than what you do. What God has planned is greater than what you fear. Don't let temporary troubles make you doubt eternal promises. Don't let a bad season convince you that your life is over. Don't let unanswered prayers make you think God is silent. His silence is not his absence. His delay is not his denial. His ways are perfect, and his plans never fail. So whatever you are facing today, know this: God is not trying to figure things out. He's not scrambling to fix what's broken. He's not searching for solutions. The answer is already set. The provision is already arranged. The breakthrough is already scheduled. The only thing left for you to do is believe. Because whether you see it or not, whether you feel it or not, whether you understand it or not, God has already worked it out. And if you hold on, if you don't quit, if you stand firm in faith, you will see it come to pass. Stay with me, because there's still more I need to share with you. When you look back at your life, you'll realize that every time you thought it was over, God was still working. Every time you thought the door was permanently shut, he was preparing a better one to open. Every moment you thought you were forgotten, he was writing your next chapter. God has never abandoned you. He has never left your story incomplete. Even when you couldn't see his hand, he was guiding you. Even when you didn't feel his presence, he was right there beside you. The problem with human nature is that we want to understand everything before we believe. We want to see the whole picture before we trust. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith says, even when I don't see it, I know he is working. Even when I don't feel it, I know he is present. Even when I don't understand, I know he has a plan. This is the kind of faith that moves mountains. This is the kind of faith that pleases God. Hebrews 11:6 says that without faith it is impossible to please God. Why? Because faith is the evidence of things not seen. Faith is trusting in what is already finished, even when it's not yet visible. Many of you are struggling right now because you are looking at your situation with human eyes. You are measuring God's ability by what you see, but you have to understand that the unseen realm is more real than the visible one. Before you were born, God had already planned your destiny. Before you encountered your struggle, he had already prepared your breakthrough. He is not reacting to your problems. He is leading you through a divine process. Look at the story of Joseph. His brothers betrayed him. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused, and he was thrown into prison for years. It seemed like his life was only moving backward. But what he didn't know was that every setback was actually a setup. What he didn't see was that God had already arranged for him to become second in command over all of Egypt. When the time was right, he was promoted, and everything made sense. What does that tell you? It tells you that your present pain does not define your future purpose. It tells you that even when life seems unfair, God is still in control. It tells you that what the enemy meant for evil, God will always turn for good. You may be in the middle of a test, but God has already determined your victory. You may be facing obstacles, but God has already made a way through. You may be wondering how things will come together, but God has already worked it out. That means your only responsibility is to trust him, to keep walking even when you don't see the road, to keep believing even when nothing makes sense, to keep praising even before the breakthrough comes. Because when you trust in him completely, you will see what he has prepared for you all along.